where is the fear of repercussion? Where is the fear of the police? And I wonder if some of this is born of, it might be cultural, it might be how we're parenting, how we talk about the police. But it's also double standards, in the way that events have been policed, particularly over the last 5 years. There have been some situations where the police have been more than willing to get stuck in. The Sarah Everard visual, lockdown protests, but in the case of, it was certainly seen to be perceived that in Black Lives Matter, they stood back. In Hare Hills, they ran away. It doesn't help the situation. I think you've also got a febrile environment online. I've noticed a slight evolution with certain, supposedly responsible people who are now sort of sharing theories and literally saying, well, I'm not sure this is true, but if this is true, this would be bad. I think that is a step on. Look, I fully understand any culture where you get the brutal murder of young girls like this, you're going to get some reaction. People can protest, they can share their anger, but you've just got to think, particularly in Southport, just if I can finish, in Southport, at the moment, you're in a community that is reeling. And there was an example of where people smashed up a wall to throw bricks. You can't pretend to yourself that this is for their memory or for that community.
Overnight, we have had the news that a 17-year-old has been charged with the murder of those three young girls in Southport. It is the law that we can't discuss or debate that. So thinking about the protests, Geoff and Ashley, Ashley, what do you make of the scenes that we saw? And I mean, what that gentleman was saying there, his reasons for doing that.
Well, it's quite clear that there's a lot of frustration just bubbling underneath the surface, and any kind of, not to, obviously this is a horrific incident, but an incident like this is enough to sort of light the match, now to mix metaphors. But, and so you can see that there's a widespread kind of frustration about immigration and a sense that those in power are not doing anything about it, that they pay lip service to it. But at the end of the day, for whatever reason, maybe there's benefit from, bringing in more and more migration to solve a population issue or to bring down wages. There's all sorts of reasons why people suspect that migration is not being adequately controlled or vetted. And people are frustrated about that. And so an incident like this just becomes something that lights the tinderbox. And I think some of the response to it, which is the same, it's like, those in power are just looking for any reason at all to go on and on and on about the need to control information on the internet. And as I said, this is probably a better reason than most that they give, but I think it would be the absolute worst reason, because underneath the surface of this is a deep distrust of those in power. And that distrust is only deepened by calls for more censorship, because it seems to vindicate those who think that there's something else going on. You have conspiracy theories floating around. And so it doesn't touch and even compounds the underlying problem, which is a deep distrust of those in power.
And it is a really pervasive idea, isn't it, Geoff, that springs up in many different fronts, that this idea that people often have that there is something going on that we're not being told. And that comes up all over the place, but that has, in certain corners of the internet and for certain people, that motivates them to do some, in this case, quite violent things.
Yeah, I think the problem with this case is the legality of it has created a sort of vacuum which a lot of pre-existing stuff has been able to fall into. And also, I think a lot of people will just look at these moments, look at the things in Hare Hills, these outbreaks of disorder, and just think, where is the fear of repercussion? Where is the fear of the police? And I wonder if some of this is born of, it might be cultural, it might be how we're parenting, how we talk about the police. But it's also double standards, in the way that events have been policed, particularly over the last 5 years. There have been some situations where the police have been more than willing to get stuck in. The Sarah Everard visual, lockdown protests, but in the case of, it was certainly seen to be perceived that in Black Lives Matter, they stood back. In Hare Hills, they ran away. It doesn't help the situation. I think you've also got a febrile environment online. I've noticed a slight evolution with certain, supposedly responsible people who are now sort of sharing theories and literally saying, well, I'm not sure this is true, but if this is true, this would be bad. I think that is a step on. Look, I fully understand any culture where you get the brutal murder of young girls like this, you're going to get some reaction. People can protest, they can share their anger, but you've just got to think, particularly in Southport, just if I can finish, in Southport, at the moment, you're in a community that is reeling. and there was an example of where people smashed up a wall to throw bricks. You can't pretend to yourself that this is for their memory or for that community.
And it's one thing, isn't it, Ashley, as Geoff sort of suggesting there, is that it's one thing to be angry about something and to maybe want to go out and protest about something. It's another thing to then go on and, assault an emergency worker, as one person was arrested for last night in London, or to, smash up a wall or set a car on fire. I mean, that's quite the leap to make, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and that's what tells us that there's something else going on, that there's an underlying frustration that events like this just kind of speak to, but it's not really about that event. But one of the most disgusting aspects of what's going on is just the blatant opportunism. Like, we don't know anything about motives. But when awful things like this happen, thankfully, rarely, it's almost like everybody wants the perpetrator to be on the other team. And they're just so sure that they're on the other team. And then when that doesn't pan out, everybody just kind of goes silent. The thing is that thankfully, random acts of violence are actually really rare. And the fact that this is a knife crime, and it makes the news, is because it's so horrifying and it's so rare, but also because gun control is pretty decent. There are a lot of there's a lot of gun violence that doesn't even make the news in the United States. But most violence is patterned, not random. And we'd be a lot better off trying to understand the underlying patterns of crime than, which is often much more banal, than kind of losing our minds over these sorts of very rare incidents. But the fact that we do tells us that there's something else going on entirely, that there's frustrations under the surface that are just waiting to break out. And it's not a good situation to be in.
Geoff, I'm interested in a couple of aspects here, actually. One is kind of this idea of things being out of control, because people in Hartlepool, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have expected what happened last night to happen, because they wouldn't have felt they were connected to what happened in Southport. You can almost understand what happened in Whitehall because it was near Downing Street and they want to send a message to to the Prime Minister or whatever. So there's this feeling of kind of out of controlness, that something's being directed online. And that's kind of crazy. But also a frustration in that, we pick a side and these people are violent thugs and other people say, no, they're not. They are truth tellers. The point here is actually you should be able to protest if you believe X, Y, or Z. That there's too much migration into this country, that we're being lied to, whatever it is, as long as you can do it peacefully.
Well, there are, recent historical examples of where policing and sensitivities have been managed. We know about this. We know about in certain grooming cases, the fear of seeming racist has stopped people approaching things in an objective way.
Yeah.
So that's been demonstrated to us now. And the problem with that is the people in that moment might have been acting out of what they thought were the best interests or the least worst scenario. But there's a legacy to that. And yeah, I totally get the anger. It's coming at the end of a period where people have felt poorer. It's coming at a time where there's a lot of frustration out there. But in Hartlepool, for example, you see a video of a group of people, they're standing around, they're expressing their anger, fine, but then a person of color walks past and is randomly punched, and you just think in 2024 to see that is just worrying. And that person who did that, they can't claim that they're a friend to the cause. What they are is they're an angry person who's looking for a cause to attach that anger to. But you're absolutely right. The anger itself and the way that information has been managed is a legitimate concern.